my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Naomi Briercliffe. Naomi is a partner and a solicited advocate in the international dispute resolution practice at Squire, Patton, Boggs in London. She's ranked by Chambers and Legal 500 for international arbitration and public international law, and represents states, corporates, and high net worth individuals in commercial and treaty arbitrations, as well as before international courts and tribunals. Alongside her counsel work, she also sits as arbitrator and is actively involved in the arbitration community, including through the LCIA. Naomi, we're delighted to have you with us today to explore thought leadership and particularly what works in practice. And maybe we can start by grounding this in what thought leadership actually looks like in practice today.
Sure thing. So, hello everyone. Thanks very much to Svet and the team for inviting me to join you all today. I'm looking forward to discussing this topic with you, which is really a very important one for both building yourself as a practitioner and also generally building a career in a law firm sector or market. I'm going to start with the definition. So what is thought leadership? And I've got it here on the screen. It's actually found it quite hard to define myself. So I looked at this one online, and what it told me was establishing yourself as an expert or leader in the field and shaping discourse or providing forward-looking insights in that area. And I think that is a very good definition for what it is and what it captures, which we're going to come on to discuss. In general, it means building a brand in a particular area, which is then going to help you establish authority and trust for your clients, who may know you and you may want to develop the relationship with them, or who may not know you at all. Thought leadership is a really good way of building new relationships. And it's also a really good way of helping you stand out from the crowd, which again is relevant to building relationships with clients, but it's also relevant to building your brand within your law firms and hoping to push yourself forward for promotion in your career. It's, of course, what clients and your peers and your law firms want most of all is for you to be a really good lawyer. But there are loads of good law firms probably in your firm and more broadly in the market. And the question is how to make yourself stand out from those other people. And the way to do that is through thought. One of the ways to do that is through thought leadership. And I think it's also really important to remember, if you're a disputes lawyer, and I imagine that a number of you here are disputes lawyers or in the field of disputes, that most clients are not in the business of disputes. It's relatively easy, or can be relatively easy, to market as a transactional lawyer, since once you're in and you've done a good job, then your client's likely to have another transaction or issue that you can help with. But as a disputes lawyer, things can be a bit more tricky than that. Of course, there are clients who have repeat disputes and ongoing dispute advice needs, but that's not all of them. And even those who do have those sorts of needs might not need you on a day-to-day basis. So producing thought leadership, and we'll, as I say, come on to talk more about what that is practically, is a way of keeping in touch with those clients regularly, so that you're demonstrating an understanding of their needs and that they know where you are when they do need you. So essentially, it's a way of you staying relevant. I think that's how I describe it.
Thanks, Naomi. And one challenge lawyers have is not knowing what their angle should be. So it would be great to unpack how lawyers can identify a focus without overthinking it.
Yes. Well, we've called the next slide "Finding Your Focus," and it can indeed be really difficult to work out what your focus should be. But you do need one, and the reason for that is that thought leadership takes a lot of time, and we only have so many hours in the day. You have to make sure that your efforts are going to be appropriately targeted to the clients and areas that you want to be seen as a specialist in. So, I mean, obviously for some people finding a focus is obvious. They will only have been interested in one area of law, or have particular language skills that mean that make thought leadership in a particular market makes sense. But for other people, and for most people, it is more complicated. It's certainly more complicated for me, because there might be lots of different areas that you have experience in, or you've been pulled in lots of different directions over the course of your career, and any one of those could be an avenue that you might be interested in exploring. I think that's a really good way to start when you're trying to find your focus, is to write down all of the cases that you've done and the clients that you've worked for, and try to start to map out whether there are any trends that come to light as a result of that, whether that's related to sector, to geography, to particular procedural issues you've dealt with, or particular types of case more broadly that you've dealt with. You can also bring your experience pre-law into the mix. For example, if you studied languages, then you note that down and say, okay, well, I can speak Arabic, and so it'd be great. I can, and I did a case over here in Saudi Arabia at one point, and maybe then you can see that this would be a logical area of focus for you. Or maybe you grew up on a farm and you just know loads, therefore, as a result, about agricultural processes or the agricultural industry, and then you could think to yourself, well, maybe that's an area that I might focus on. And I've also spoken to associates who have ongoing life experiences that have helped them derive their focus. So say, for example, if you've got caring responsibilities for somebody, and it means that you're in touch with the medical profession a lot, then this may be a reason why, or a story that you can then tell to make a focus out of the life sciences sector, for example. I think generally, in finding your focus, it is helpful to have some experience or some nexus to the topic that you're going to pick. That helps you to be credible in that area, and it helps you to have a story that you can then bring to market and bring to clients. It's not impossible to pick something that you don't have experience in already, and to decide that you're going to get that experience. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And if you're in a full service law firm, it can be easier than if you're not, because you may align yourself with a team, for example, that has, I don't know, if you want to do mining, for example, and you've got a mining team, you could associate yourselves with them and start to do thought leadership pieces that then result in you getting the experience that you need in order to focus on that area. One very important thing to think about in picking your focus is what topics actually motivate you. It's very hard to put the energy into thought leadership pieces when you don't enjoy it. You only get paid for your day job. Thought leadership, although it's often essential to your career progression and through building business actually for your law firm's progression in the longer term, may not be recognised in terms of compensation at the time that you're actually doing it. So you're likely to have to do it on top of your billable hours, and it can be really difficult at the end of a really busy day to get on with an article or prepare to speak at an event if you aren't interested in the topic at all. So I'd say, all of that needs to come into thinking about when you're finding your focus.
Thank you, Naomi. And that actually connects to my next question, which is writing in very practical terms. So what formats actually work, and how do you think lawyers can use collaboration to get started without adding too much pressure?
Well, I think you need to think about if we think broadly, I'd say broadly, and this was the previous slide, there are broadly sort of two areas of thought leadership, which have lots of different subcategories. So you've got writing and you've got speaking, and through both of those, you can collaborate, as you say, Sveta, with others. If we move on to the next slide, I can start breaking them down. If we start with writing, I put 3 different types of writing onto the screen here. It's not all inclusive. There are many others I'm sure you can think of, including blogs. But what we've got here are some of the common types you could think about: client bulletins, short form articles, and academic pieces. And there are pros and cons to each of these. And this alludes to your point, Sveta, about thinking about how you can dive into things accessibly. You want to think about how you can dive into things accessibly. You also want to think about what's the most effective use of your time. So if we go through each of these different types, the first one being client bulletins, this is probably the most practical form of writing thought leadership that you can do. It's good value for time in that it can be short. There's a limited amount that you can express in terms of your opinion, though. So it's it's a quick and dirty targeted approach, but may not, which a client might be really interested in, so it can grab their attention, but it might not be the piece that is going to create your name in an area and mean that you are picked up by other law firms for potential speaking opportunities, for example. The next type is the short form article, for example, something for Clue blog or for PLC or something of that nature. It's still quite short, but not as short perhaps as the client bulletin, and it gives you a little bit more space to express yourself. Those types of pieces are more likely to be picked up by Lexology and read by people who've got a little bit more time and a real specific interest in a particular area. It takes a little bit longer, but also I would say, I think this is very good time value type of writing. The third piece is academic pieces. These should only be taken on with extreme caution unless you're particularly excited about academic writing, which occasionally I am. But they can help you build your name as a speaker in a particular area, or if the types of law that you're interested in require entry into academic circles, then writing longer pieces at certain points can be essential to developing those relationships. But the return to the benefit, cost-benefit analysis falls a little bit more on the cost side, usually, if what you're ultimately trying to do is to bring in clients. There will be clients out there who are really fascinated and interested to read your academic article, but many of them will not have the time. So you need to think carefully about how many of those that you're going to do. That goes for book chapters as well. And whichever piece you decide to choose, one really good way of making sure that you're maximizing your benefit is to think about how you're going to promote the piece. So once you've decided which avenue you're going to take, you then want to think about how you can reuse it, essentially. Self-promotion is absolutely key in that. There's no use writing something and then hoping it's going to be picked up somewhere. You want to make sure it will be picked up by your target audience and by others as well, and ideally as many people as possible. And some ideas for promotion are here on the slide. The most obvious way of making sure your target audience is going to pick up the piece that you've written is to send it to them directly, of course. So you want to make sure that you're sending what you've written to your target clients. That's directly with a personal message on it, as well as through firm distribution lists. But apart from that, you can think about how you're going to publish your piece more broadly. Maybe perhaps you could do it through or with an institution. I mentioned before publishing on Clue blog and also on PLC. You can also publish in journals of the arbitral institutions if you're a disputes lawyer. Trade magazines are a really good forum for attracting new clients that you would not otherwise meet. And then there are other ways of accessing broader audiences. So, for example, publishing with somebody is a good way who has a very strong market profile, is a good way of getting your name out there. You obviously don't want to be eclipsed by somebody else, but if you choose the right person, you won't be. And people, some of your colleagues are likely to have quite strong followings already, and if you publish with them, then you get the benefit of their thoughts on your piece, and also you will get the benefit of their audience as well. for what you have written. And some clients, because they follow the relevant individual, are likely to then see your name as well, and be following that and more likely to read the article. Finally, on this slide, social media is your friend. Don't neglect it. I understand there's going to be another presentation at some point, Sveta, am I right, on social media and the use of social media?
Yeah, after this one.
Okay,
Next
perfect.
one.
So I won't go into that too much. But I just say that, LinkedIn is a great tool. You can, if you've got clients on there as well as broader market contacts, then it can be an easy place to help build a brand and to get your thought leadership pieces seen by the right people, and also to generate a following. Another point probably here is to say that whatever piece of writing you choose, my recommendation would always be to think about whether it can be made dual use, as it were. So it takes a lot of effort to write something, even something very short. And it's, if possible, you want to recycle what you've done into another form, to make the most of the time that you've invested. So, for example, could you if you've written a short form article, could you then turn that into a client webinar, for example? Or if you're doing a client bulletin, can you also do something internal on that? So presenting to your team or presenting to another team in your firm, that's going to raise your profile internally, and make you the go-to person on that issue. The more you can make of the work that you've done on any particular piece of writing, the better.
Thank you, Naomi. And just to echo what you said, if you've already taken put so much effort into writing a piece, then definitely make the effort and share it with your colleagues and contacts and friends. You'll be surprised how many people will actually find that very useful, and it will open to more opportunities. So building on what you said on writing, maybe we can turn to speaking, especially how lawyers get their first opportunities before they're known names.
Yeah, so I think, I'm going to talk a little bit, first of all, about the different types of speaking that you might do, because I think that thinking about how you're going to get those opportunities is automatically linked to kind of what opportunities are out there. And like writing, speaking can cover a variety of different things. And I've mentioned just a few of those in thinking about how you can maximize the benefit of a writing piece. In maximizing, so, I mentioned client webinars, for example, and internal speaking opportunities, but there are lots of others. So speaking more broadly at within your law firms, speaking at client events that are organised by you or the firm, speaking at events organised by third parties, lecturing at universities. All of these are different types of speaking opportunities that you could be considered thought leadership pieces. Personally, I love speaking because I enjoy advocacy. I like it much more than I like writing, but as I mentioned, it's always good to try and get two things out of one. So again, also if you're speaking at an event, it's quite good to, if you've done the research, do the writing. I rarely take that advice myself, but it is the best way of using your time. In terms of, and also when you're thinking about what speaking to do, you want to think about, what is the benefit that you want to get from the particular opportunity? Is it more speaking opportunities? Is it sort of building your profile in the market amongst other lawyers? Or is it, trying to get specific clients to instruct you? And choosing the right opportunity amongst those different types of speaking engagements that are available is very important. And then coming to your question, Sveta, this is what the bubbles that I've got on this slide really go to. How are you going to get your first opportunity? And I think the easiest ones are often the speaking internally opportunities. And that's actually something which people overlook as being a good way to get external speaking opportunities. Obviously it depends what type of firm or practice you're working for, but if it's relatively large, then, and you've got people in the team who are speaking externally relatively frequently, then speaking in front of them can give them the confidence in you and your speaking abilities to then suggest you for other opportunities. Or if you've put in the effort to organize an internal event, then it might be that somebody says to you, well, that was really good. Now maybe let's do that for a client. Or you can suggest that. If people come up to you at the end of your event and say, that was excellent, thank you so much for delivering that piece of training to us, you could say, well, I'd be really interested in doing this for clients now, and I've had this idea on for which clients I would like to do it. And that can be a really good way of getting those external facing opportunities. In generally speaking up to people is a good way of getting opportunities. So I have a number of people that I mentor within my firm and also externally, who will write to me if they see that I'm co-chairing something, or otherwise will say to me, I'd really like to get involved in speaking at an event that's being organised by this institution. How can I go about doing that? And I do think about how I can help them. That's I take my mentorship responsibilities very seriously, and I will always try to help people out with that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people will do. People like to help other people, and it's an easy win to try and help your contacts into speaking engagements. So don't be shy, essentially. Tell people if you're interested in doing something. Obviously, you need to tell them why it should be you and what it is you want to speak about. But provided you have got that story to tell, then people will generally help you. Other things that you can do include getting involved in arbitral institutions. Applying for positions in arbitral institutions is fantastic if you can get them. It tends to take a number of years to try and network your way into those sorts of positions. It's very rare that you just put in an application form and you get it. So you need to think carefully about that. And about 2 years out from whenever the position is about to come through would be my advice. But you don't have to have a position within an institution in order to be able to organise an event necessarily. And actually organising an event can help you in the long term get those opportunities. So, something that I did relatively early on in my career was to reach out to the sort of WIAG representatives and organise an event with the ICC. And, I put a lot of energy and effort and time into organising that event. And through it, I got a speaking opportunity because I was speaking at the event that I organised, which is always a benefit. And also, started to build the connections that later allowed me to become it was ICC YAF, not WIAG, but anyway, allowed me to become an ICC YAF representative. And the same goes for all arbitral institutions. Most people who are in those positions are really keen to hear from people who have ideas about events. And so that can be a good way of getting yourself a first speaking gig. Another thing to do that people don't realise is a way of getting speaking opportunities often is to reach out to conference organisers that they don't know at all before panels are settled, and to propose themselves for opportunities. So, for example, if you look at the institutions and they have an event coming up and they might have 1 or 2 speakers advertised, or just have the event name, but they don't yet have any speakers listed, you can write to them and say that you would like to speak. Obviously, again, you need to be able to explain why you're the right person to speak at that event. And it helps to have something under your belt to show that you're a safe pair of hands. But not necessarily. If you've done a lot, for example, on the writing side, and you can say, I can see you're having a conference on space disputes, for example, and actually, have you seen that I've written all of these pieces about space disputes? Then somebody can have a look at those and test the credibility of what you're saying. And maybe happy to then put you on a panel to talk about that topic. Another one that I would recommend, and that I do recommend to associates in my team, is to ask questions at the conferences you attend. And this gives you you'd be surprised at how much visibility this gives you. If you're attending a high-profile conference on a topic that you really know something about, but you wouldn't necessarily have been given a speaker opportunity because, it's this panel of dignitaries essentially in the field, you can really elevate your name and your profile through just asking an intelligent question from the audience. Speakers love it when you ask questions because otherwise they're sat, they could have I've sat in conferences where I've got 100 people sitting there and everyone's nodded along very politely. And I know that the topic was very interesting and then nobody says anything at all, which is really demotivating. So if you are able to, you can always, generally think of something that you might want to say in advance and plan it because you want this to be an eloquent presentation that you deliver. You also don't want it to be a long speech. It has to be a question, but a well thought through question that's related to the topic will attract the attention not only of the panelists, but it will also attract the attention of other delegates, and it will potentially lead to speaking opportunities in the future, and certainly lead to networking opportunities at that conference, I can assure you. The last point that we've got on the slide here is a reminder that you need to prepare for every single opportunity that you get given to speak. It's no use turning up and thinking that you're going to be able to deliver something on the hoof. I don't think it's possible for anybody to do that, actually. It doesn't matter how experienced they are, at least not to do it as well as they might otherwise have done it. Obviously, if you're an expert in a field and you've spoken at lots and lots of events, you might be able to put something together that's cogent, but it's going to be much better if you've done some level of preparation in advance. And certainly if you're at the outset of your speaking career, as it were, you want to make sure that every single time you turn up, you're going to be excellent. And that is the best way to get more speaking opportunities after you've got your first one.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for the very detailed and useful advice on speaking. And I'm conscious of time and wanting to leave some time for questions. So maybe just briefly on the last question, which is sometimes it's quite reassuring for people to hear what doesn't work. So it would be good if you can touch upon common pitfalls and any lessons learned along the way.
Yes. So I would say on that, there are, I just touched on one, which is, turning up and not being prepared. That is the worst thing that you can possibly do, because once somebody's heard you once do something badly, they're unlikely to invite you back. And word does spread. It's quite a small community. Taking on too many opportunities, this applies both to speaking and writing, really, but taking on too many opportunities or opportunities where you lack focus is a danger. It might not be something that prohibits you from doing things in future or creates a bad reputation for you, although it can mean that you're not as prepared as you would otherwise be because you're too slammed. But I think it's just a waste of your time, and it can lead to you having, to burning out, essentially. We talked at the outset of this conversation about how much time it can take to write and to speak at things, and how little time we all have. If you take on too many things and you're trying to prepare for all of those, then you're unlikely to do a good job, and it's likely to lead to a burnout at some point. On the writing side, it sort of mirrors the speaking side, really. On speaking, you have to prepare. Writing, you obviously have to prepare because you have to write the thing. But if you publish things that don't have substance, don't add any value or wrong, then that can create a bad reputation rather than a good reputation. And obviously that's something that you want to avoid. Maybe I'll stop there. And if people have questions, they can ask them.
Thank you so much, Naomi. We can now open it for questions. Let me just stop sharing my screen so we can see. If anyone has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put your question in the chat.
Now's the time to raise your profile.
I am trying to raise a hand, but I cannot find the button, unfortunately.
You can just go for it.
Yes, I will just go for it. Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. This was very insightful, and I'm happy that I attend this today. I have one very simple question. What you are describing is, in my head at least, someone who already has a platform or enough experience, and they have some topics in their head to talk about or some topics in their head to write about, which is amazing. And my question is, if we are at the beginning of our career and we don't really have much to say or much to write about, what platforms or what events should we follow and attend so that we kind of gain more experience in that and gain more insights? And then eventually, hopefully, after some time, we can also write and talk about this uh, ourselves. What would be your recommendations? Where do we start?
Well, I think you still at the outset need to think about your focus, because that's going to define where you're going to look for the ideas. So that's still step number one, is think about what it is. I mean, maybe at the outset of your career you haven't got tons of practical experience on case even, but most people have, if they dig hard enough inside themselves, some interest, or something that they have done where they feel they may be interested in future. I always think actually you can redefine yourselves as many times as you want in a career, as long as there is sort of justification for it. But you should always be thinking about what it is you want to do if you want to progress. And once you've done that and you've got your sort of focus and your idea, that's then you can then work out where it is you're going to get the ideas to then go on and speak and write. I mean, even just following the news in relation to a particular sector should give you some ideas, because then you're going to start seeing the issues. Say, for example, if you're particularly interested in oil and gas, actually, that's very broad. You probably want to split that out. But if you're interested in gas, for example, as some of my colleagues really are, then you would start following sort of industry developments in relation to in relation to gas, and you might want to start talking about particular issues that are impacting markets in certain jurisdictions that you're also interested in. So obviously, as a result of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, there were many articles that were written about issues facing gas supply in Europe and beyond there. And that's if you're reading industry magazines, you'll get that sort of idea. And then if you're having also exposure to related client matters on a day-to-day basis, you will see exactly what it is they're facing, and that should then could then trigger ideas as to what you may want to write and speak about.
Thank you so much. So, if I understood correctly, first I need to find my focus, and then once I find my focus, then I need to kind of find in industry related articles and events, etc. That's very helpful. I mean, I already have a focus. I think. I mean, it's been a not so long time, but I already found my focus, and I kind of have already idea what I need to do. It's just sometimes it feels a bit difficult to still start it, and this kind of puts how to say, it's a very nice summary of where should I start. So thank you so much.
And also just starting, right? I mean, if you have an idea, you just have to start. And I'm sure there'll be people who'll be willing to support you in starting. It doesn't have to be a long piece. It can be a short client bulletin. That's a good way to start writing.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Yes, thank you so much. This is very
Thank
helpful.
you.
Thanks, Lika and Naomi. So our next question is from Isla. I'll read the question in the chat from the chat. Naomi, do you believe that exploring various topics rather than being too specialized in the early days of your career is desirable?
So I think yes. I mean, even now, I struggle with being concerns about being too narrow, because there's more than one thing that I'm interested in. But I think that I think you can explore different options, but I think that you have to still be realistic. And you can't do everything, and you won't be a specialist in everything. So exploring is fine as long as you're not exploring everything for too long. because then otherwise you'll just waste time. I mean, in reality, as a junior lawyer, you'll often be supporting senior lawyers in their business development efforts at various different times. And that's a really good way of learning how to do it, because you'll see what they do. But it might not be that what they do is what you want to do. And it also might not be that you should even think about that as being what you want to do, because, you know, in many law firms, it's not possible for there to be two people doing the same thing. So my advice in respect of that sort of thing is to just make sure that you're keeping an eye on time, and you're constantly thinking about what it is you're going to end up specializing in, even from an early stage.
Thanks, Naomi. So next question from the chat. Some journals or publishers like MLR don't easily take on newcomers articles or in preference to known scholars. What advice or publishers could you know that could aid on this?
So I think looking for the shorter blogs and pieces are usually the publishers of those are a bit more open to publishing. And if you've written something and you've sent it in and it looks good, they're generally more willing than academic journals to take pieces. And as I've said, it can be that you should in any event be cautious about academic pieces, because they take a very long time and they don't necessarily lead to elevating your profile as effectively as shorter pieces in any case. I haven't had too much difficulty, even as a junior lawyer, in placing short pieces with sort of arbitration blogs, and that's a good way of reaching lots of people. Often people within your firm, marketing contacts will have relationships, which can be a good way of getting in. And if you don't have that, then trying to build a relationship with the editors of these blogs can be very helpful. And they're usually quite accessible people, because they are people like you, and they're often, you know, associates in law firms, who will be open to you contacting them, and you can, you know, arrange a coffee or a telephone call and talk to them about something you'd like to publish.
Thank you so much. I think we have one more question. So from Sama, to which extent it is important to be present and active on social media other than LinkedIn? It ties a little bit to the topic of our next webinar, but maybe you can touch upon it a little bit in the context of thought leadership and writing and speaking opportunities.
Well, you might be talking to the wrong person if it's anything other than LinkedIn and professional, because I think that I possibly come from, you know, I haven't ever used anything other than LinkedIn to advertise myself professionally, apart from sort of standard media outlets like newspapers and magazines. I'm sure that you know, there is probably a world out there of TikTok and Instagram, which is professional as well. And you know, in certain markets that I go to, clients are always astounded that I'm not using Instagram and Facebook to advertise my professional services. So, you know, it is quite market specific, but I find that a little bit uncomfortable, because my personal life is on those platforms and my professional life is elsewhere. And obviously you want to be careful about that. But in terms of using social media more broadly, I think it is very important. I mean, it's very important.
Thank you very much, Naomi. And we're on time. So thank you for a wonderful and very, very useful presentation. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We'll share information about the recording, publishing, and subsequent article that we'll write about this, summarizing the session via our LinkedIn page as well, and also information about the upcoming webinar. So thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for having me. Good luck, everyone, with your writing and speaking.
Thank you.
Best of luck.